Hi people, hope you're all well. I'm just watching this screen with some trepidation because I don't know if you could see that in the as viewers, but there's something going on my screen at the moment. Usually with practical problems on this laptop, I would reboot the whole system, but I've tried doing it and it isn't working. So if anyone knows about shaky screen, sometimes when I kind of bang it on my knee, it's irritating. I don't really want to restart the video though. There we go. I want to talk a bit about Rishi Sunak's announcements on crime and antisocial behaviour. Um, this is obviously something I care a lot about. Um, just looking at the Times here from a few days ago, March the 28th. Payback time as victims to help decide how louts are punished. You know, as being socially conservative on crime, you'd think I'd welcome this, and I do, but I always treat ministerial announcements on crime, whether it's coming from the very top, the Prime Minister or other ministers, with some caution because we've heard it all before. I mean, the Tories always talk tough on crime and they've been in power for 13 years. Maybe some things have improved, but I think many people still feel disillusioned with the whole justice system. And I maintain that it's actually beyond the government. I think the judicial system is part of the problem, which the government can't interfere in that. So I think there's a very fundamental issue in the whole legal establishment, and I'll come to that in a minute. But let me just address some of the things that the government's proposing. I welcome some of it. Something's better than nothing, so I do welcome some of it. There's a picture there of Sunak and Braverman going through the streets of Chelmsford, I believe it is, where the policies were announced. And there's a piece in the Times also about Clacton-on-Sea, which has, like many seaside towns, experienced a rise in antisocial behaviour. This is some of the things that are proposed. I'll just maybe say a few words about each. Immediate justice. Perpetrators of antisocial behaviour such as fly tipping, graffiti, and other damage to public infrastructure will be forced to clean up or repair damage within 48 hours of the offence. Okay, that seems reasonable, but I remember in the Blair era there was, proposals of bringing louts to the ATM and getting them to take out money on the spot. So again, I'm surprised that something like that doesn't already exist. Fines, on the spot fines for antisocial behaviour will more than double, with £500 for graffiti and littering and a maximum of £1,000 for flag tipping. Um, One big thing that seems to be overlooked in all of this is youth gangs. And that's a very big thing, and I'll come back to it. Of course, fly tipping is a problem. It causes pollution and it's antisocial, but I think, youth gangs terrorizing people is a bigger problem. Um, Victims, the government will expand and relaunch community payback schemes in which victims of antisocial behaviour will decide how perpetrators are punished. Now, I definitely welcome that, but I'd like to see the details. Definitely, if victims have more of a say, that's always a good thing. That's always a welcome thing. And I know Dominic Raab, as Justice Secretary, did push for that as well, that for victims to have more say in parole hearings. So, I welcome that. Just a quick word about parole hearings, by the way. I don't want to make this the whole video, but I'll just briefly mention it. Charles Bronson, i.e., Charles Salvador, um, Salvador has been denied parole by the parole board. Now, if you don't know, Bronson's probably Britain's most notorious prisoner. The refrain is, "Oh, but he never killed anyone." I'm sorry, but Charles Bronson is a violent career criminal. He went to prison for armed robbery. It's not some trivial offence. And the reason the parole board denies him parole is because of his history of violence inside, and he'd shown no real remorse for his actions. I think he hides behind this eccentric persona. I don't think he's necessarily a threat to the public at his age. He's in his 70s now, but I think they made the right decision, and I don't often agree with the parole board. I think they can often get it wrong, but I think they made the right decision. And it kind of disgusts me, to be honest, how people treat him like some sort of folk hero. He's not. He's a career criminal. Anyway, sorry to get back to my list. Quicker Action, website giving members of the public the chance to nominate projects for unpaid work, will be revamped to make it easier to access. It will also speed up the start of projects. Okay, that's good, but that's tackling bureaucracy and it's good, but it's relatively scratching the surface. Online tool, a digital tool, will allow members of the public a simple and clear route to report antisocial behaviour, receive updates on the outcome of the case, find guidance, and challenge what they find unsatisfactory. I definitely welcome that. That's a good thing. It's one of the biggest things for victims of crime is it's traumatic enough going through these experiences, but you don't want the stress of what to report it to, and then the police maybe give you various contact numbers. And it has to be as simple as possible for victims of crime and anyone who witnesses these things. Nuisance begging. I know some charities have warned this will punish the poorest. There will be greater powers for police to relocate beggars if they're causing public distress, such as loitering outside ATMs. The strategy says nuisance begging undermines a sense of public safety and public spaces must be kept clear of any debris and paraphernalia. This will come alongside more help for rough sleepers. Um, yeah, I mean, the thing is, some people are a little bit naive about this. They think, oh, someone's homeless, they're automatically a charity case. Homeless people are actually as diverse as any other, and you do get nuisance beggars, and that can be quite intimidating to older people, to vulnerable people. Some of them can be aggressive. So I'm not in principle opposed to that, but I think that there needs to be, again, there isn't much focus here on youth gangs. That's something I really would like to see a lot more focus on. Hotspot policing. Police will be given extra resources to deploy hotspot policing in 10 pilot areas, which follows research that found 50% of crime is carried out in just 5% of areas. 50% of crime. Forces will be given funding to train officers and invest software to identify crime hotspots. This comes into policing, actually. This is not something the government could be blamed on. I think policing culture needs to change. They need to get away with this nonsense of investigating non-crime hate incidents. Police chiefs need to stop wasting resources and start tackling crime. Some forces, the chief constable of Greater Manchester, chief superintendent, has called for that. There needs to be a back to basics policing. A very big part of this. Let's see. Drug testing and expansion of drug testing on arrest will broaden the types of drugs for which police can test, including ecstasy and methamphetamine. Can't pronounce it. Testing will be expanded to include arrest for antisocial behaviour and violence against women and girls. Good. A big part of this is actually the banning of laughing canisters, which apparently is a big problem. Now, Hugo Rifkin has a piece in the Times where he talks about how the failed war on drugs, let's legalize everything. And I've heard this argument before. The argument is punitive to just ban drugs. People will get them anyway, and it doesn't make much difference. I don't fully endorse that. And I have a problem with this cavalier attitude to drugs. Drugs ruin lives. Part of the proposals is a 2-year prison sentence for using laughing canisters. I'm not sure that's the best approach because it takes up prison space. I think prison should be for violent offences and crimes against a person, i.e., theft and things that really hurt people. But someone privately using a laughing canister, I'm not sure if that's the best use of resources. Um, I'm not sure why they're so harsh on that. I mean, you get a young offender who violently assaults someone and they won't even go to prison. I think there needs to be much, much tougher penalties for aggressive behaviour from youth gangs rather than, certainly I don't think using drugs should be advocated. And I don't agree with those who want universal, you know, um, legalization. I think that's profoundly naive. The other problem I have with it is it kind of normalizes it, whatever way you look at it, if you legalize something, by definition, you're saying, well, it's not such a big problem. Um, Drugs fuck people up. Sorry for the language and not monetized. So drugs really mess people up, and so many crimes, the perpetrator is high on drugs. Sometimes truly awful crimes. So I have a big problem with this kind of normalizing it and this cavalier approach, like, oh, let's just legalize it all. And the argument is it stops it going underground, but there's only a very few number of case examples to work with, and they're not universally successful. Portugal's the one that I cite, but anyway, There's this case here actually. Kaylee Byrne, 16, inhaled nitrous oxide before she collapsed. This stuff is dangerous. It shouldn't be treated as some sort of trivial thing. Um, anyway, I'll read out the other points. Troublesome tenants. The plan will make it easier to evict tenants who are persistently disrespectful and disruptive. The time it takes between a private landlord serving notice for antisocial behaviour and eviction will be halved, and the range of disruptive and harmful activities that can lead to eviction notices will be widened. That's probably a good thing for other tenants and for the landlord. There's good landlords and there's bad landlords, there's good tenants and there's bad tenants. This is specifically talking about bad tenants. I know my parents had to deal once with people who they rented out the bungalow we had in rural Northern Ireland, and when they came back, the place was pretty much trashed. So you do get these selfish people that they're bad tenants, and landlords shouldn't have their hands tied and throwing them out within a reasonable warning period. Because it isn't just for the landlords; it's also other tenants. If they're blaring music throughout the night, if they're constantly getting in fights and so on, using drugs, that has a detrimental effect on the life quality of other tenants. So it should be a lot easier to get rid of them. I agree with that. Um, Airbnb crackdowns. Homeowners who want to list their properties on Airbnb or other letting sites will have to enter the address on to register, so councils have a database of short-term lets. This will allow officials to take action if short-term rental property prove problematic. Well, I can't comment much on that because I don't know the issues. I don't know the contention there. Right, youth clubs and parks. There will be funding for sports and community clubs to offer youngsters positive ways to focus their energies. Plan promises 1 million extra hours of youth support in crime hotspot areas. The government has committed itself to creating 20,000 places at uniform youth groups, including Scouts and Girl Guides. Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, told the Times that the investment in youth clubs and grassroots sports centres would help prevent young people from being driven into crime through boredom. Councils will be given funding to restore parks and great powers to revive their high streets. Well, I welcome it. Of course, I welcome it, but it's not a bad thing. But we have to stop this sort of attitude, or there has to be a bit of pushback from this attitude. Oh, I'm bored. That's why I threw stones at this pensioner's house. I was bored. That's why I vandalized someone's car. Boredom is far too often used as an excuse. And my issue here is, oh, well, young people are bored. That's why they resort to crime. Firstly, that's generalizing all young people, like they're all potential criminals if they're bored. And secondly, it's an excuse, ultimately. There needs to be a much tougher line with young offenders, frankly, including tougher penalties. And it's because so many young offenders literally laugh at justice. They know because of their age they'll get away with it. And they're making people's lives a misery. So, you know, um, that's only part of the issue. I'm not against it, because certainly it would deflect that argument. But I don't accept this idea that, oh, well, they're committing crime because there's no youth clubs. That's an excuse. Okay, being bored is not an excuse to terrorize society. And sort of serving this idea that it is giving excuses to young offenders. It's not teaching them right from wrong. It's not saying take some damn responsibility for your actions. So that's the issue I have with that mindset. Young offenders need to know that they're being held to account for what they're doing, because that's what being an adult will eventually be. That's what being part of society is about. So if they don't want to go down a darker path and end up in adult prison, there has to be tougher penalties now. I strongly believe that. So yeah, in summary, I welcome some of that. Times is quite critical in the sense that they say simply introducing new laws won't stop the problems. Yes and no. Yes and no. I actually think the problem's deeper though. I mean, I'm not totally rubbishing this. I do welcome some of it. I think some of that definitely giving victims a greater say is a very good thing. Some of those proposals are good, definitely. And it's refreshing to have something to praise when it comes to law and order for once. But I do think that there is a deeper problem. I think that sentencing council is massively out of touch. I think they should be elected. I've said this time and time again. Why? Because they're the body responsible for issuing sentencing guidelines. The government may create legislation, But it's the sentencing council that's responsible for the length of sentences, which many people think is just too soft. So they need to be far more answerable to the public. At the moment, they're unelected bureaucrats. Judges need to be far more answerable to the public. You know, when a case is presented before a judge, they have aggravating factors and mitigating factors. They take into account all those variables. But I do not accept that they have their hands tied. I think there are many cases of judges being ideologically lenient. Um, and that has to change. I think there should be much more accountability for weak judges. The recent moves for, televised verdicts is good, but there's a lot more that can be done. Antisocial behaviour, this mentions fly tipping and that sort of thing. That's a problem. But the thing I think that is really, really menacing is youth gangs. You know, these are these are teenagers who wouldn't think twice about beating someone to death. So this thing of, oh, give them more youth clubs. No, they need severe punishments. They need to know that what they're doing is unacceptable in a civilized society. Um, Frankly, I support scared straight approaches. I'm not saying they should go to an adult prison. I think there should be much tougher penalties, much tougher. Because at the moment, young offenders laugh at justice. The sentencing council's approach is pathetic, and I think victims of crime, feel that they don't have a voice. So certainly, proposals to give them more voice is good. The other thing is adults must be legally defended if they defend themselves. Example, you get someone who takes on a youth gang because they're vandalizing his car, or he or she sees them vandalizing something, um, and then those teenagers just try to attack the person and they thump them. They should be protected by law as a matter of self-defense. As it stands, if someone stands up for themselves against a youth gang, they could end up getting prosecuted. That is perverse, and it shows how out of touch the sentencing council is. In fact, on their website, they basically insinuate that they're against punishment for young offenders. Um, I really have a big problem with that. I think they need to drag themselves into the real world when it comes to this issue. They need to understand what it's like to, have gang people are in a situation where they're frightened to leave their own homes. It's disgraceful. So these young offenders need much, much tougher punishments. I favour some sort of scared straight approach. Opening up new youth clubs might relieve the boredom, but this idea that they'll suddenly get to see the light, I think boredom is far too often used as an excuse. I mean, what about rural teenagers? You know, um, I'm not saying there isn't crime in the countryside, but I just think the boredom excuse is just that, an excuse. And it should not be used to kind of deflect from responsibility. In other words, if you commit an offence, if you're 15 or 16, you're not going to go to an adult prison. You should feel the weight of the law against you. You shouldn't be protected because of your age. I don't think, for example, um, teenagers should have anonymity if they're found guilty in a court of law. Due process, by all means, and innocent until proven guilty. But if they're found guilty in a court of law, I don't see why they should have their identity protected. Because, being exposed lets people look out for them so that they're not also victims, and it also means it sufficiently shames them. Because at the moment, young offenders just don't, very few of them have any real remorse. I'm afraid I'm pretty cynical when it comes to young offenders because I've seen with my own eyes and my own experience so many examples where they're remorseless. It's just so there needs to be a much, much tougher approach. And with all due respect to social workers, the excuses just wear thin for the people that have to put up with them. Anyway, that's my take. I welcome it, but I think there is a deeper problem in the system. I think judges need to be more accountable. I think the sentencing council needs to be more accountable. And I think sentences need to be tougher. So some of this new legislation is good, but it's not more has to be done.